Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another discussion with regarding our current political situation. And I know that there are some people. There have been a handful of people who told me that they didn't like when I do political videos because I guess they want me to be some kind of an edge lord and not care so much about my country or constitution. And I'm not going to be that way. People have said that they're going to unsubscribe from my channel, and in fact, I did lose over 100 subscribers in the last 2 months from people who only want me to who don't want me to comment about our political situation or what the Constitution really stands for. I consider myself a patriot more than those people who call themselves patriots and then actually do everything they can to undermine the Constitution unconsciously, if not deliberately. And one of the people that I'm interviewing today, Eddie Tabash, is a constitutional lawyer who has met face to face with at least a couple of uh, our country's presidents, and has also argued cases before the Supreme Court directly.
Not directly.
Eddie, we have been talking
Yeah.
on and off for well more than a decade. Good to see you again. Always a good discussion. Take us in.
Okay. First, I've never argued directly before the Supreme Court. I wish I had, but I've filed a lot of amicus briefs. What
Okay.
has been happening is that by the time Trump left office in January of 21 after his first term, because of his three Supreme Court nominees, he created for the first time ever not just a majority, but a supermajority on the Supreme Court. And this court is eroding the separation of church and state. Now, for our purposes today, separation of church and state will mean the following: that believers and non believers are equal before the law. And in the words of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, no branch of government can treat anyone differently because of the God or gods they worship or do not worship. This Supreme Court is eroding church state separation on two fronts. It's allowing only the religious to have special exemptions from laws that apply to everybody else. And it's taking the Establishment Clause, which requires neutrality in matters of religion, and is allowing not what the framers intended, not what the text says, but the historical practices. And this even violates the two principles of conservative constitutional interpretation: original intent and the content of the text itself, called textualism. So, by allowing historical practices, it means, regardless of how benighted, regardless of how wrong previous generations are, their conduct and their misinterpretation of the Establishment Clause will now supersede what the framers actually intended. This is crazy, but that's what they are doing. Most notably, the avalanche against us started in 2022 when they overturned Roe versus Wade. And then in the Bremerton School District, in Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, the court, by the 6-3 majority, allowed a high school football coach while on the job to commence large prayer meetings with both football teams, and also to allow spectators to come down from the bleachers to join in, all in the context of a public high school football program. So, this is the context in which we non believers could actually face potential second class citizenship, as difficult as that is to even imagine. Earlier this year, in starting his new religious or faith based program, Trump even said that let's not focus on separation of church and state for a while. Let's bring back religion in a big way to America. Well, he doesn't understand the Constitution. He doesn't understand government neutrality in matters of religion. And he doesn't understand it's not the role of government to be an usher for the reintroduction of formal religious beliefs into government policy.
I have
Now,
to wonder if the issue is that these people don't understand or they don't care.
both, but I think Trump really doesn't understand. I mean, if
I would grant that Trump,
yeah, yeah, I
anything
mean,
you tell me Trump doesn't understand, I will believe
yeah,
you.
I always, if you ask him, if you say, well, you look at Madison, the principal author of the First Amendment, and his primary influence, Thomas Jefferson, they talked about the equality of believers and non believers. Trump is not going to respond, yes, but the wording of the Establishment Clause is vague. And if you say to him that, for instance, in September of 1789, when the Senate had what was to become the First Amendment, they discarded two possible wordings, which would have only prevented government from favoring one religion over others, but not necessarily preventing government from favoring all religions against non belief. And those two wordings were rejected, with the final wording that Madison shepherded through the Joint Committee saying no law respecting an establishment of religion. He's not going to say, well, there was dissent and Justice Story, one of the early Supreme Court justices, made arguments that we're a Christian nation, and and also the historic. He's not going to give you an intellectually substantive argument. For instance, in June of 23, and I feel bad and frightened. I was one of the few people to catch it in one of his speeches. Trump said that we have to keep out from America the arsonists and the atheists. Well, nobody picked up on that. I picked up on that. But
I don't remember him saying
yeah,
that.
he said that. So he may not even know what he means, but his judicial nominees who are successfully on the federal courts know exactly what they're doing in terms of steadily bringing America toward theocracy. Now, the Supreme Court term ended in the end of June of this year, 2025. We dodged a bullet on one case only because we got Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Barrett recused herself because she knew one of the lawyers. Oklahoma chartered with taxpayer money a sectarian Catholic school. Even the Oklahoma Supreme Court said this was unconstitutional. We had a 4-4 tie in the court because Justice Barrett recused herself. And again, we got Chief Justice Roberts on this one. But if this comes up again, and with Barrett on the court, we lose 5-4, it's going to be one of the most devastating losses of a major pillar of church state separation. Even Madison, 4 years before drafting what was to become the First Amendment, said in his memorial and remonstrance against religious assessments that public money should never be used to fund any religion. And that's always been a pillar, and that shows the original intent of the framers. And now Oklahoma was about to fund with taxpayer dollars a sectarian Catholic school. Now, what I've heard is the latest after losing that case, Oklahoma is coming back and is going to try to use taxpayer money to fund a sectarian Jewish school to get it before the court again. This would be an enormous, enormous loss. There was another case where, uh, out of Illinois, that again, this is already an unjustified privilege for religion. Religious entities are permitted to be exempt from the unemployment tax. Catholic Charities, which is part of the Catholic Church but has a purely secular function, also wanted to be exempt from the employment tax. And the Supreme Court, again, the 6-3 religious right supermajority, allowed that to happen. And that means that if you work for goodwill and you lose your job, you might be able to get unemployment compensation. But if you work for charities, Catholic charities, and lose your job, you won't be able to. Another case is where the Supreme Court upheld the right of South Carolina to stop recipients in that state from using Medicaid money, much of which comes from the federal government, to use for Planned Parenthood. And before that, no state was ever permitted to exclude certain providers on ideological grounds from what medical aid recipients could focus on and where they could go. Another very, very chilling case, Mahmoud versus Taylor, where in Maryland, a, religious parent wanted to have their children opt out of anything in the school curriculum, the public school curriculum, which would offend the religious teachings. By another 6-3 vote, the court decided that there is a free exercise of religion right to shield your kids from hearing anything in the public schools that violates the tenets that you want to imbue in your children in terms of religious beliefs. This is a horrible decision, which is open ended. It
So
not
that
only means,
means,
you know,
yeah, which means that we can't teach ancient history. We can't even teach American history.
yeah, can't teach
We certainly
evolution.
can't teach geology.
Yeah, and you can't teach
Yeah.
tolerance for LGBT community. Now, what that means is not that the school curriculum has to change, but the parents have the right to make their kids absent from any classroom discussion where ideas will be expressed that contradict the religious beliefs the parents want to inculcate in their kids. So this means we'll have generation of kids growing up with severe lapses in their education.
My wife and I have testified before the Texas State Board of Education a number of times. And one of the things that alarms me is that as much as you might expect that they would have attacked, historical science, if the way that they would attack geology, biology, evolution, and so forth, as it's not just science. As much damage as they've done to sex education, the real issue isn't there either. They've actually done more damage to the teaching of history, and I mean specifically to American history, because of this notion that they want the kids to believe in American exceptionalism. So they cannot teach, and they've said that they cannot teach that slavery was the cause of the Civil War, and they cannot teach civil rights issues because they don't want white people to be embarrassed about being white. Which, when I learned about these things, I was not embarrassed about being white. I knew that people who lived before me and people in my own family were fucked up dickheads, but that didn't mean that I was. I think the only time white people get upset about learning about the civil rights issue is when they are still trying to perpetuate that bigotry, and that's it. If you're more open-minded than that, if you don't side with, if you're not a white supremacist, if you're not a racist, then why would it bother you? But I
They're
understand that
dilemma.
the way that
Well,
they want to teach, they don't want to teach anything that would be embarrassing to American history, because they want the students to believe what they know is not true. They want the students to believe that the United States is a successful and rich country because of a covenant between God and Moses on which this nation was founded.
yeah, well, I don't think you'll find in any of the Old Testament communications between God and Moses something like, ye shall look after on my behalf all 50 states. But okay, I think they were. But here's something else too. This is very connected. The religious right wing attempt to undermine factual truth extends also to science. On the scientific, skeptical, and empirical science part of the ledger, there is a justifiable outcry because this week the Center for Disease Control, um, under the certifiable nutcase RFK Jr., has formally reversed its position and now claims that the vaccines can cause autism, for which there is no scientific basis. So you can see a connection between wanting to fracture the truths of history and wanting to fracture the truths of empirical science.
So, RFK Jr., he's the one that would, if he could, advertise roadkill, part of this complete breakfast.
Yeah, well, this is, I mean, never in my life have I seen such a stark case of like father, unlike son.
Yeah.
But this is, uh, but it goes together. It goes together because once you reject empirical evidence in the name of ideology, uh, you get this, you get this sort of thing. One of the, I think we discussed this when you last interviewed me in Minneapolis a few months ago. What a lot of people don't realize is that our young vice president, J.D. Vance, who statistically could assume the presidency even before this term ends, depending on Trump's health. Uh, what Vance does and is he is part of a movement called Catholic integralism. This was founded by Harvard Law professor Adrian Vermeulen, and when you hear about it, you think it's nothing but a fabricated exaggeration to make fun out of the religious right. It's not. These people actually believe that because Protestant governments over the past 500 years have failed to impose religious morality, that we have to go back to that era in which the Catholic Church controlled government. Now, when asked about that, though Vance has expressed support for the idea, he says he knows it's unrealistic because this is a Protestant dominated nation. But that does not change the fact that one heartbeat away from the presidency is somebody who desires, he admits he can't implement it, but if he could, would favor the reassertion of Catholic Church hegemony over civil government. And that, I mean, you could tell that he has what you could call some of the arch conservative religious views when during last year's campaign he condemned women who make a choice not to become biological mothers as childless cat ladies. I mean, that's kind of a throwback
Yeah.
to the arch fundamentalist view that a woman has no value unless into the world. And it's also a condemnation of women obtaining their equality in the workplace. So you can see that. The question is, how far will the Supreme Court go in allowing actual second class citizenship to befall non believers? In 1998, I was invited back to my alma mater, Loyola Law School, to meet then Justice Scalia. And I asked him, I said, Your Honor, what about this? The state of Mississippi says you get $1 off your state tax return if you affirm a belief in God. He goes, No, that would be coercion. But what happens is he does believe that government can express favoritism for religion, but he never said how far that could go. For instance, when the Supreme Court struck down a requirement of a display of the Ten Commandments in public schools in Kentucky, Scalia wrote in dissent that the notion that government can't favor religion over irreligion is false. That means he believes government can favor belief over non belief, which automatically assumes a kind of second class citizenship for non believers. He also said the First Amendment permits the disregard of the devout atheist. Well, how far does that disregard go? So the question is this: what would today's 6-3 religious right wing majority, or 5-4, assuming we'd get Roberts on something this horrendously overt? There is hypothetically a Christian restaurant owner who serves the general public. This is important, serving the general public. This Christian restaurant owner has a sincere religious belief not to do business with atheists. Two known atheists come in, and this religious restaurant owner refuses to seat them at the lunch counter. We remember something like that from American history. And he says, I have to not serve them because my religion, my church, has an edict against doing business with atheists. And in fact, that specific church has such a requirement. Would the Supreme Court say, no, once you do business with the general public, public accommodation, you cannot use your religion to discriminate against people with differing views? So,
My
yeah.
perspective, I'm so annoyed that nobody seems to share it in government, is that since there is absolutely no actual factual evidence of a god or for anything supernatural, nor any logically valid arguments for same either. And when you gather everybody of every different religion together, they can't agree with each other on much of anything. As we all the religions combined can't even show that there's a there, that there in fact is any supernatural anything at all, then it would be nothing short of dishonest to make assertions about, pretending to know things you don't know about that god or that religion. So the only honest thing you could do is shut up about it and not make any laws based on it. We would have to base, if you wanted to, if you want to make legislation, it has to be secular. It cannot be favoring any particular religious belief because there's no way to show that there's any truth to any particular religious belief. So the government then has an obligation to be honest and not support one baseless speculation over any other. But nobody has that position, and I'm
Well,
alarmed that they.
in 1989, or whenever it was, that the Ayatollah Khomeini issued the fatwa, the death sentence on Salman Rushdie for writing the satanic verses. The American arch right wing politician Pat Buchanan wrote an article sympathetic to that decree because he said we have to stop the public disparaging of religion. And he was also concerned that if heretics can persuade people as part of the general public, that perhaps those persuaded away from religious belief will lose their salvation. And should government allow people to destroy the eternal life of those who otherwise would have accepted the true faith? I mean, that was very scary. Um, it was also interesting because even the arch religious right winger William F. Buckley Jr. wrote a long essay in which he concluded that Buchanan was anti Semitic. That was a raging controversy. Many right wingers even took that position. But that would be the death knell of secularism. And here's how that could happen: Clarence Thomas takes the position that the Establishment Clause, and he's been joined by Justice Gorsuch, who's actually worse than Scalia, his predecessor. It's a crazy idea, but Thomas and Gorsuch assert The Establishment Clause was not meant to protect the rights of non believers or religious dissenters. It was meant only to stop the federal government from preventing individual states from having an official religion. So, according to Thomas and Gorsuch, it would be constitutional for a state to have an official religion. Now, what would Thomas and Alito, I don't think Gorsuch would go this far yet. What would Thomas and Alito, the most extreme religious right wingers on the court, do if a state actually said, we're going to have a blasphemy law? Because if people can speak out against God's existence, they will jeopardize the salvation of the listeners. If the Establishment Clause does not provide special rights, equal rights for the non believer. Now, I raised this with the Catholic religious right wing law professor Doug Kamek in 2002. And his response was interesting. He said, "You atheists have no protection under the religion clauses of the First Amendment, but you might be able to have your rights to express your views survive under the free speech clause." So, I mean, but the thing is,
I mean, sorry, the establishment clause is all we need, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, but the thing is, the and also, for instance, the free exercise clause has been interpreted by an earlier and better Supreme Court to encompass non-believers. In Turcaso versus Watkins in 1961, Maryland back then still had a law in the books saying that you must profess belief in a supreme being and a future state of rewards and punishments in order to hold any kind of public office in the state. When that came before the Supreme Court, and what was Torcaso was an atheist, and he wanted to apply for a notary public license, even though he was a non believer. And the US Supreme Court said that the free exercise clause of religion protecting the right of individual belief applies to atheists too. But you see, we don't know how far they would go. I mean, we even if we get like we got a few times, like in the Oklahoma school case, Chief Justice Roberts, we still lose 5-4. And however, if Trump were to be able to replace even Roberts, though he's generally a religious right winger, would be a net loss for us. So, what the Supreme Court in its majority has not yet answered is to what extent can any branch of government limit the equal rights of atheists under the law such that believers have more rights than non believers. And unfortunately, that's already been answered in the affirmative by giving only the religious exemptions from laws that otherwise apply to everybody else, like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and uh, the protection under what they call RLUIPA of prisoners and land use. For instance, it's already happened that only churches can supersede local ordinances and develop mega large buildings because they're being religious. And actually, it's interesting because it was the right wingers that took the right position, and the church state separationists took the wrong uh, position in the employment case when in 1990, when it was the right wingers that took the position that governments don't have to grant special rights to only the religious that wouldn't be available to anyone else.
No,
So
I,
it's
There
very
was a recent government memo that Trump sent out that Christians can discuss their religious beliefs at work in federal workplaces, and that people who just didn't want to hear it uh, didn't have a legitimate counter position. So having a neutral position, doesn't even work in the workplace. Like they're allowed to, even your boss, to witness to you, and you can say no, stop doing that. But it isn't considered a position if you're like, no, we shouldn't be discussing this at work at all.
I think you do have a right to stop the proselytizing. The
Hmm.
point is you can't stop it before it starts. So you are protected in doing that. The problem is that even allowing it to begin until the object of the pitch protests puts the employee in a very difficult spot. I mean, so what do you do if you're working for a company and the boss says, I know you're an atheist, I know you're a Jew, I know you're a Muslim, but I want to let you know about Jesus because without accepting him, you'll be doomed to eternal suffering. And you say, boss, I know you really believe this stuff, but I have my own views and I don't want to be proselytized for any religion. The boss has to stop, but then you have to live in fear that the boss will figure out some way to retaliate against you in a
Hmm.
way that can't be linked
Hmm.
to your refusing to hear the religious pitch. It's a very dangerous position,
yeah,
even though
that's
you can stop it. I mean, who wouldn't worry saying
Hmm.
to your evangelical Christian boss, I'm an atheist boss, and I really have a right not to hear this. I don't want to hear it.
I ought to make a video asking people to tell their stories about when that sort of thing has happened to them because I mean I have one. I've had a couple where bosses have gotten very confrontational with me over their religious fundamentalism, not exactly knowing what my position is, but knowing that I'm not one of them, so they need to put me in the corner and start berating me over it and threatening retaliation like getting fired and that sort of thing for not confirming a similar belief to theirs. So I should make a video inviting people to tell those kind of stories because I am interested in
Yeah,
hearing
it's
about that sort of thing.
now, since you're in Texas, something happened this week, which is a church state violation because the separation of church and state means believers and non believers are equal before the law, which means no viewpoint on matters of religion can be subject to invidious discrimination by any branch of government. Uh, Governor Abbott this week declared, says the state of Texas, I don't know how this works because it's only the national government that usually does it. The state of Texas declares the Muslim Brotherhood, which has never been operative in the United States, let alone Texas, and CARE, which is a Muslim civil rights organization, to be terrorist groups.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I believe that's unconstitutional. I mean, first of all, the Muslim Brotherhood is not operative. Secondly, what does it mean if a state says they're, what if, let's say, Alabama, a heavily Protestant state, had declared a number of years ago when the Civil War was going on in Northern Ireland, the state of Alabama declares the Irish Republican Army to be a terrorist group. What's the meaning of that? But with respect to CARE, which is an organization of Muslims that promote what they feel to be their rights, even if some of us feel that they want special rights, there is nothing terroristic about saying, I want special rights, because if that were a key element of terrorist, then all the Christian nationalists who want special rights would be terrorists. So,
And Trump's recent memo identifies atheists as terrorists as well.
yeah, American atheists. So, as does Saudi Arabia, and look at the love fest between um,
Mhm.
the Saudi Arabian leader and Trump this week. And when one of the reporters asked the crown prince or whatever he was, the king, or asked him about the Saudi engineering of the killing and dismembering of the journalist Khashoggi for exposing things in the Saudi government. And Trump said, "You don't do that. There's no need to insult our distinguished guest."
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
So
They
on
can
to
complain
kind
about
of
having. Go ahead, dear.
to connect these two issues, shouldn't there be due process other than just a government official declaring you a terrorist or a terrorist organization? Shouldn't you be able to prove that you are or not a terrorist or a terrorist organization? Why can the governor just say that this group is a terrorist organization without the burden of proof, without due process? And why can the Trump administration say uh, um, people who espouse anti-Christian views are terrorists? Like, shouldn't you have more criteria than that? Like, you advocate violence, you advocate political violence. I mean, should you not be able to prove that you are or not? How can you just be declared something without any kind of due process?
that's an excellent point, and I think that would come into play if there were an actual loss of rights. Now, for instance, I think that if Abbott tried to prevent CARE from conducting whatever it does in Texas, that Muslim organization would have a establishment clause and a free exercise and free speech cause of action against Abbott and the state of Texas for violating the rights of conscience and right of free speech. And then I think if it works properly, that the state of Texas would have to adduce, have to bring to bear in court what is the specific evidence, and it can't be arbitrary. This is just like whatever one's views are on the Middle East. If you're lawfully present in the United States, you should be able to express any views. And I think that it's unconstitutional for Secretary Rubio to say, even if you're lawfully present in the US, unless you're a citizen, I can deport you if you say something that I arbitrarily determine to interfere in foreign policy. If a college kid stands up on campus and says something, whatever it is, regardless of how opposite it is to American foreign policy, that's not going to impact the implementation of foreign policy. The State Department is not going to say, we can't do what we wanted to do because of what this college student from Jordan said last week at Columbia University. So, I mean, that's another problem. The problem with what Abbott did is to show severe bias against a re- adherence to a specific religion without, as you said, without any proof. And the question of proof, you see, it becomes tricky. So, uh, if let's say you have two foreign students and they're debating each other at a university, and one says, uh, Israel should not exist. The other said Israel has a right to exist and in self defense has to wipe out Hamas entirely. Neither of them should get deported, irrespective of what the US policy is, because they're lawfully present in the US and the free speech rights attached to them. So, the other thing, too, is Trump talks about being an advocate of free speech, and yet he's trashing the First Amendment with not only these types of uh, attempted deportations of lawfully present individuals, but his lawsuits against media for defamation when the media engaged in protected expression of opinion. That really destroys the First Amendment. So this much vaunted protection of free speech is actually untrue, uh, and it frightens First Amendment lawyers and those Americans who care about the First Amendment to see TV, radio stations, broadcasters just fold under these lawsuits when these lawsuits could be defeated if the Supreme Court interprets the free speech clause properly. So this is a, but with respect to declarations of terrorism, if Abbott is expressing his personal opinion, that's one thing. If he issues a formal proclamation, then it's an official act by the state, and I would challenge that. I mean, if Abbott stands up and said, I declare that they're terrorists, that's borderline, but it could be his free speech. But if there's a formal proclamation, or if the Texas legislature passes a resolution and Abbott signs it saying CARE is a terrorist group, or the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist group. I mean, what is the purpose of going after an organization that's outside the US and was operative primarily in Egypt? I mean, you can, for instance, historically, you can say the real problems with the Muslim Brotherhood. They were behind the assassination of Anwar Sadat because he tried to bring peace to the Middle East. They are extremists. But to say, I hereby, or you can even say, it's my view they're a terrorist group. But I don't think you can, without and even if you could with respect to them, because of their history, you can't with respect to CARE. But again, why bring up the Muslim Brotherhood when they have nothing to do with Texas?
Another
CCP,
thing is that when you bring up whether somebody is a terrorist, there's a definition of terrorism. And for anything, if you want to say, are they this? Well, then you have to look at what this is. That's what the
yeah,
definition of what this is, right? Do they fit the definition? And are the current incarnation under Trump of immigrations and customs enforcement, that is a terrorist organization. That fits the definition. American Atheists does not.
yeah. So the question is, um, what is okay? Trump can express a view. However, if American Atheist is singled out for some special kind of surveillance by the FBI, that is a First Amendment violation. Okay, you see, I mean, that's really important. Uh, between the free speech rights of a president and formal government activity to exhibit and implement bias against an organization with a viewpoint on matters of religion. See, now, the other thing is, people say Jefferson didn't participate in drafting the First Amendment. Not directly, but, and this is really important, Madison was the principal author of the entire Bill of Rights. The greatest influence on him in terms of religion and government was Jefferson, and all the scholars believed their views were identical on the subject. While Jefferson was in Paris, it was Madison in 1786 who pushed through the Virginia legislature the Bill for Religious Freedom. Later on in 1821, Jefferson, reflecting on the passage of that bill, which Madison brought about, delighted that the bill didn't just protect Christians, but the infidel of every denomination, to use Jefferson's words. Well, there's every reason to believe that Madison had the same view when he was drafting the First Amendment. In fact, in October of 1788, before Madison introduced the first draft of the First Amendment in June of 1789, Madison expressed in a letter to Jefferson his concern for infidels, and he expressed his concern that popular majorities would narrow the rights of conscience. So that means that Madison went into the drafting of the First Amendment with the objective of not allowing religious majorities to encroach upon the rights of minority viewpoints on matters of religion. So the intent is really clear. The intent is very clear, and even if you look at the language, even though it's a maybe a funny wording, no law respecting an establishment of religion, no law even showing respect to any establishment of religion. And if you look at the legislative history, it shows that the first Congress, in drafting and passing it on to the states, had uppermost in their minds the protection of the rights of conscience of everyone before what was to become the First Amendment went from the House to the Senate. One of the representatives from Maryland, Daniel Carroll, who was an original signer of the original Constitution 2 years before, summed it up. He said, "The rights of conscience are of such peculiar delicacy that they will be able to withstand not even the gentlest touch of government hand." And that shows the framers were concerned with protecting the rights of belief and the rights to express those beliefs of everybody and afraid of majority tyranny. So, I mean, so it's really clear. The thing is, this Supreme Court is not recognizing it. For our purposes, we have to pounce when religious right wing government officials go from expressing personal views that disparage minority religions and non believers to official government action.
I just wish that the founding fathers had stated expressly when they talk about the wall of separation of church and
Yeah,
state, for example. Thomas Jefferson just mentioned that in his letters to
yeah,
explain to his friends what he meant by that. But he should have been aware that other people who should understand obvious things will still not understand what he means by that. So it needs to be expressly spelled out when they write the document. It needs to be in the document. And so they should have said that since nobody can show that there's any truth to this God belief, any version of this God belief, any religion, no religion can show that they're the right one or that there is a right one, then the United States government must necessarily proceed as if there evidently is no God. But that doesn't mean that they have to declare that there is no God, nor that they have to prohibit anybody from believing whatever makes sense to
yeah.
them. We still have that freedom regardless, but the government cannot endorse or embrace any particular faith.
However, first of all, the Constitution speaks in broad generalities, but a pillar of conservative constitutional interpretation is original intent. The intent of the framers, particularly Madison, the principal author, is very clear. And Daniel Carroll's encapsulation of what happens to your rights of conscience with even the most gentle push from government shows that what the framers were interested in. Also, if they wanted government to be able to only not discriminate between one religion and another, but to be able to side with religion collectively against non belief, they wouldn't have rejected those two proposed wordings, which would have allowed only just that. So, on original intent, I think uh, it's very clear. Just like in both the 14th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, we read about due process. Well, nobody spelled out specifically in detail what due process means in every situation, but you can logically infer. You can even more strongly infer from the legislative history that it was intended that believers and non believers be equal before the law.
And
Also,
on that, as
yeah,
far as literal interpretations, when it says that any person, not citizen, but
right.
person, any person on American soil will be afforded due process. That means you can't just grab somebody that has no criminal history, just abduct them and deport them to a country of your choosing.
Well, again, we have to look at the history, have to look at the wording. What's curious is that in no provision of the Bill of Rights is any legislative history more lucid than the protection of non believers equally. And another argument, uh, another very strong argument, Madison said the purpose of the Bill of Rights was to limit the power of government, which means it didn't expand the powers of government so that government does not have the right to side with the majority of people and discriminate against minority religious viewpoints, because the purpose was to limit the power of, of government. I mean, this is why in 22, when I debated a religious right wing lawyer before the Federal Society, in my closing statement, I said, think not I've come to bring peace to the Federalist Society. I've come to set member against member, because those of you who call yourselves libertarians have no business siding with your colleagues who are religious right wing. That destroys the limited government that you believe. However, the problem is what Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes said in a very, very candid and honest statement in the first half of the 20th century. The Constitution is no more than what a majority of Supreme Court justices say it is.
Yeah, that's upsetting too, because I remember when I went to Australia, I heard how they interpreted they took our founding documents, and when it came to the First Amendment and everything, they interpreted it very differently
Yeah.
than, not just differently than I would, but differently than I thought anyone could. And I thought that you had to have had a religiously poisoned mind to have distorted the clear and obvious intent of this passage the way that you have, so that they found it and Australia has since turned against that. You know, they're they've become more progressive than the original interpretation. But the people who first interpreted, who first established those laws, took that to mean a support of religious authoritarianism.
Well, there's a problem with British Crown countries and free speech anyway. Canada with their hate speech law, but worst of all, England, where now people are being arrested for uh, insulting public officials online. I mean, there's a serious problem with that, and also the on again, off again blasphemy laws in all of those countries. The problem is the special privileging of religion, where it's considered to be automatic that if someone is religious or a member of the clergy, you automatically have to treat them with special kid glove treatments. And that again relates to the notion that somehow religious believers and belief deserves more respect and more insulation from offense than any other type of belief system. We can't have that. I mean, that's
The way that I would have interpreted this again, I mean, like I said, since nobody can show that there's any truth to this at all, then the government should proceed as if there evidently is no God, right? But then more than that, when these, I just detracted myself or distracted myself from what I was about to say. So I'm embarrassed.
no,
And
no, no, not me. But it's true. Now, uh,
oh yes, yes. I'm sorry. I remember what it is. When these people profess this, we're supposed to be treating them as if they're more wise or moral, or well, like there's they're on some kind of a pedestal, when in fact they believe what is not only what is not evidently true, but what is not even possible. Why are we affording them greater credence when, okay, you believe a crazy thing that we can prove is not true? Why are we even allowing you in the room to talk with the adults?
well, because you have a free speech right to talk with the adults, but you have no right to have your government adopt your view. And that's the crucial distinction. Early on, when the religious right first came to power, and my first generalized work against the religious right was through People for the American Way, founded by Norman Lear, TV producer. And I spent some time with Norman early 81. I said, Norman, we're making a mistake. The religious right is growing stronger by the moment. It just won't be the left that's sufficient to defeat them. You need to enlist principled conservatives who truly believe in limited government with libertarian leanings to also fight against them. He said, because the struggle to stop government from overreaching into the bedroom and into the mind,
And your personal
universal.
identity.
Yeah, it's universal, and we have to show people who think they support the religious right but who believe in limited government. I think the best person to express this was former New York Governor Mario Cuomo. um, I actually heard him speak in 1989, and he said, it's rank hypocrisy for the religious right to preach to us about limited government and then to turn around and try to tell us, the American people, what God to believe in and how to apply the judgment of that God to our bodies and to our bedrooms.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, because one of the things that I was constantly accused of, once anybody figures out that I didn't have a religion, they would accuse me of being a communist. I believe in ownership of private property, so no, not communist, but whatever. They just have to put me in a label some way because they can't deal with the policies. They've got to categorize me so that they can do the genetic fallacy.
Exactly, exactly.
And they would criticize me for oh, I get it again. I talked so much that I forgot the point I was going to make.
That's okay.
I'm sure I'll remember it again in a second. I've really got to write these notes down. I do have some comments that I have to read, which have been building up, and there was a question that comes up for you. So Primordial Puggles offers $50 Australian and says, "Thank you so very much for everything you do, good sir." Thank you very much for that. And then Nadia Yvette Chambers offers €5 and says, "Dr. Dabash,
Oh, no,
will
doctor.
Thomas." Yeah, that was a surprise
Yeah,
to me, but I am surprised that I said that that you I mean, you've met everybody, having private conversations with Norman Lear, you get to meet the president and everything. So when you said that you'd filed these things for the Supreme Court, I honestly thought you were arguing
no,
before
no,
the
I
Supreme
never
Court.
stood up before the nine justices and presented a case.
Okay, well, I sincerely thought that you did because
No,
you've done
no,
everything
no.
else. So
Um, However, and though I didn't directly argue before the California Supreme Court, In '07, I filed, when I heard the first church state separation case, I filed the only amicus brief that dealt with the church state separation aspect of same sex marriage. And I found out through inside channels that I can't disclose that the court was impressed with it, but they dared not mention that aspect of it in their ruling.
Ooh.
So, I mean, that was a bit of inside baseball that I got. And then there were times when Beverly Hills Bar Association would have an annual luncheon with members of the Supreme Court, California Supreme Court, and those justices who were very supportive of church state separation, I would thank and laud. And some of the other justices came over to me and said, is somebody talking with us about things that he shouldn't be? And I said, yes, Your Honor. And they said, okay, as long as you realize it. So
Yeah, we interrupted the
was,
question.
this was um, for instance, and again, I can't name names. There was a appellate court justice who was considered to be somewhat of a conservative, but was really more libertarian, and was a mentor of mine, one of my law professors in law school. And I'd go to visit him in chambers, get advice. And a few years before he died, he looked up all my atheist stuff online. And I said to him, I said, well, Your Honor, what happened is I just came to the conclusion that the universe is natural, not supernatural. And he said, I have too. I just don't talk about it. So
Nice.
now Nadia's question is,
Yeah, Nadia's question says, will Thomas Dobbs concurrence nix Lawrence? And I'm not sure what they're referring to.
okay,
Hopefully,
good, good,
there's more.
okay.
Let me finish
I
reading
got
this
it.
thing.
I got it. And I can answer it.
Well,
The
I've still got to read
president
the finish. I got to finish the question. Will TN, maybe that means Tennessee, drag ban copycats, outlaw trans people? Will Comstock? Is Berlin safe? I fled in
Okay,
January.
what I want to address, I can't address them all. I want to address Thomas's dissent, no, his concurring opinion in the case that overturned Roe versus Wade. Thomas said that that should affect even the right of LGBTQ people to legally have relations with each other, the rights of birth control. He wanted to open everything else up. His religious right wing colleagues did not agree with that. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, the US Supreme Court turned down a case that would have given them the chance to revisit the same sex ruling from 10 years ago. So, luckily for us, one little oasis in this otherwise arid desert is that so far there is no appetite on the part of the other religious right wing justices to, for instance, now Lawrence versus Texas with a 2003 case where the state of Texas would still arrest people, adults, for consensual same sex intimacy. The court ruled for the first time that that was constitutionally protected activity. And Thomas dissented. However, Justice Barrett herself, in being interviewed for her new book, mentioned a whole panoply of LGBT rights, which are now beyond dispute in terms of the court. So,
Well, I don't know about that because
well, it seems
each
that
of
way
Trump's
by turning down,
appointees,
by
each of
turning,
Trump's
so,
appointees said that Roe v. Wade
yeah,
was
right.
established and
So, but
safe.
what she said was that abortion was unique because of the questions about life. But it's interesting, she said, but it doesn't extend beyond that. It doesn't extend beyond. It does extend beyond that in terms of eroding the rights of the non-religious, but in terms of attacking LGBTQ rights, and in terms of the key case of Griswold versus Connecticut, which overturned in 1965 a Connecticut law that wouldn't even let married couples use contraception. And then Eisenstadt versus Baird in 1972, which overturned a Massachusetts law that wouldn't allow unmarried people to find out about contraception. According to Barrett, those cases will not be disturbed. Now, I mean, for our purposes, losing abortion rights and the erosion of church state separation is bad enough. But in terms of Nadia's specific question, particularly about Lawrence versus Texas, that will remain. That will not be overturned.
Okay. We have a comment from Galactic Marxist, offers $10 and says, "Love your channel, Aaron. I'm wondering about leaving the United States and whether that is a good idea or not right now. Would
Well,
Portugal be a good option? I'm worried about Chega in Portugal, though. I don't know
uh,
anything about Portugal, so I'm not the one to give
okay.
advice there."
It's um, this is hysterical. I'm sorry. I just have to laugh because my ex-girlfriend moved back to her native Portugal. I go there periodically to visit her and try to persuade us for us to get back together. So it's funny. Even the joke at my expense, this is funny, Portugal. I would say this right now, particularly, I don't see any other country that overall is that safe for the non-believer unless maybe France, possibly Australia, New Zealand. I don't know, but certainly European Union countries very much flirt with restrictive speech codes against insulting religion. Even Denmark, where the Muslim Muhammad cartoons were published, and now is flirting with blasphemy laws.
Yeah, and I
So
know that
I,
Australia has hate speech laws that are,
right, right.
yeah.
Um, what I would say to the questioner is this is a personal decision that no one can make for you but you. For me personally, because I'm turning 75 next month, so I mean, I don't have infinite time. You know, I'm not going to live to see the sun burn out in 5 billion years. But uh, I personally would wait and see, unless there's a country that is so clearly protective of secularists and atheists and non-believers and understands the equality principle. I don't know where I would go right now. I mean, I really don't know where I would go right now. I mean, France is very atheistic in terms of the populace. England is too, but you have all these now persecutions for insulting religion. Uh, it's a personal decision.
I've had plenty of people invite me to Canada with promises that they have human rights.
Yeah, that would be. I can't decide for anyone else what the trigger point is where you leave the US. For me, I'm not near there yet, but I don't know what'll happen in a um, in a few years. I mean, I don't know when it'll get to the point where you know they will break in on both of us and they will say you're under arrest for blasphemy because both of you ridiculed the Bible on YouTube in these respective videos. I mean, I don't see that coming yet, but I don't know. Also, again, in the interest of full disclosure, I admit that I am a cup half empty rather than a cup half full person. My mother was a very troubled Auschwitz survivor from Hungary. And unfortunately, growing up as her son, I found myself with all her stories, her flashbacks, and the problems she had, always looking over my shoulder for what's going to get me next. So, I mean, this is really, uh, I mean, I think objectively, everything I say, in fact, when the Supreme Court fell to the religious right, people from all over the country were saying they always thought I was exaggerating, I was crying wolf, but I was right. The Supreme Court did fall. I,
Yep.
yeah,
And I remember you warning me about that in 2012 personally.
yeah, in 2012, because you could see it coming. So I don't really know whether non-religious people need to stay here, gather together, and fight, or if the juggernaut against us will be so formidable that many of us will have to leave. I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. I do have, the only thing I can say is that, particularly with us atheists, I see us all as part of a beleaguered family, and I would hope we would sympathetically support any among us who decide one way or another.
Yeah, I got one more comment, and that is, oh, where is it? Says, can you ask Aaron to send me that political alignment test so that I can see where I stand, please? I will try to dig up the link for that in the next couple of minutes. I don't want to again. We're coming up on an hour. I think we've just surpassed an hour,
We were
and I don't.
talking. I wanted to have. I had a question. We were talking about the current Supreme Court and how it's tipped over. And do you see, even if we retake the White House or Congress or something like that, do you see any way around this court without reforming it?
Actually, okay, first of all, the question of expanding the number of justices is not an ideological issue. It's a mathematical one. If we add three, then they'll add three. Then we'll add three and they'll add three. The question is, when we reach 31 justices, who will have the majority? It's more of an actuarial question, and I'm not that good at math. Uh,
Just
the
term limits.
realistic way, I don't see either side allowing the court to expand. I mean, right now, they have the White House, both houses of Congress. You don't see any religious right winger in either house or Trump saying, you know what, I've got uh, 3 years and 2 months left. Give me right now three more positions to fill.
They've got the court though.
Yeah, but to secure it for the future.
Mm.
If Trump could fill three more and they have a 9-3 majority, you see, then we would really. So realistically, I think that what's going to happen, if it goes our way, will be over the next many decades, we will reassume a majority. But I think it'll take uh, even more than 20 years at this point. I think it is a question of, do we hold on to our three and how do we get two more? I remember uh, the really wonderful Supreme Court Justice William Brennan used to say, Supreme Court arithmetic is easy. You just have to be able to count to five. So I really, but that's what I see. But I don't know. See, I can't predict this because everything is so volatile. After January 6th, I would have never predicted that Trump would be able to come back as president.
The numbers changed in our history though, but there's other ways. Term limits. We could choose the Supreme Court's justices differently, like rotating district court judges, stuff like that.
Well, that's interesting because, first of all, term limits, we don't know how that would turn out. Would it be in the next 30 years, will it be our people that'll be the most turnout? Will it be them? And who will replace the termed out justices? That could
Hmm.
have the same actuarial problem. So it's hard to predict. And as far as rotating, um, in his first term, Trump was able to appoint 25% of the total federal judiciary. He'll probably be up to 50% by the end of this term.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Again, mathematically, actuarially, who would be the district court judges that would rotate? And
Mhm.
are all of them competent to serve on the Supreme Court? I mean, there's some judges that Trump put on the district court, particularly once again in Texas, like that one in, well, that was a Bush appointee, but the one religious right winger in northern Texas, the one that tried to issue a nationwide injunction against the abortion bill. I mean, I wouldn't want him rotating on.
Mhm.
So, again, without speculating,
Mhm.
the the important point is to, at the earliest possible time, however many years it is for now, for us to pick up those two seats. And this is extremely important for, I mean, Justice Jackson's relatively young, for Kagan and Sotomayor to stay on as long as possible. But see, but then again, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had come on, had retired when Obama could have replaced her, uh, then right now there would be a 5-4, not a 6-3 religious right majority, and we wouldn't have lost Roe versus Wade outright because Thomas Roberts dissented from the overt total overturning of Roe versus Wade, though he would have upheld Mississippi's 15-week limit on abortion, but Roe would still stand. So the question is, like, I have a feeling, I'm not sure, don't hold me to this, that Alito and Thomas might both retire when they are certain that Trump could replace them. And they'll be a wash. Wouldn't be a net gain. But certainly Kavanaugh was a net loss for us because I remember I once met Justice Kennedy in 2011, and I said to him, I said, Your Honor, those of us who favor separation of church and state adore you 55% of the time. And he was laughing. You know exactly what I meant. Uh,
Mhm.
so again, this is a numbers game. I
Mhm.
will say this though, it's important that unelected people who never have to face the voters are the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution, because otherwise they couldn't be objective. See, this is the problem with state court judges having to run for election in a partisan way. It
Mhm.
destroys the independence of the judiciary. If you elect me as judge, I'll do this, I'll do that. They're not politicians. They're supposed to rule objectively regardless of the consequences. For instance, the contested partisan races for judgeships in Texas really destroy the integrity of the judiciary. I mean, you've got candidates virtually signaling how they'll rule if you elect them. That's not what judges are supposed to do. It's when you're dealing with constitutional rights, it means the minority has rights regardless of how large the majority is. That can't be subject to veto by popular majorities.
Yeah, and yet so many of the anti-American activists, the MAGA people that I've been arguing, and it's ironic that the Make America Great Again people want to make America suck ass again, and they're totally unpatriotic, they're un-American, and their whole ideals. The arguments that I have with them is that they want to say, well, that these people, there are not enough of them to count. We dominate, so might makes right, and no, not in a republic, it doesn't.
No, no, it not in a constitutional democracy where majority rule doesn't prevail. It's when in 1943, when the Supreme Court ruled in the West Virginia School Board case versus Barnett, where Jehovah's Witnesses wanted to assert the constitutional right not to have to salute the American flag. And the Supreme Court reversed itself, luckily, from 2 years before and granted the right, and said no one can be forced to violate their conscience, whatever it is. But Justice Robert Jackson, when he said that the rights of belief and the rights of conscience and the right to express your views are not based on the outcome of any election, and they depend on no majorities. You see, this is you can't have a pure democracy where the majority determines everything, even minority rights.
Now, I'd also like to clarify for people who may not be quite as adept at this as you are. We are a republic. We are a constitutional republic, but we have democracy, meaning that that the people are the ones that, as you said earlier in the show, people are the ones that have the power.
Yeah, people who have the power. I just saw. I didn't from also the Galactic Marxist.
Yeah, I was about to read that. If you don't mind, I'll do that
Sure.
now. Says Galactic Marxist offers $5 and says, "Where do you see this country in 3 to 5 years if nothing impedes the current trajectory?"
If not, you see, that's an excellent way of asking the question. Excellent. If nothing impedes the current trajectory, I see us more and more becoming a theocracy. I see us slipping into that, more and more becoming a theocracy. Because you see, the important part of the question is if nothing impedes the current trajectory. The current trajectory is Trump getting ever bolder in siding with religion against non-belief and getting more and more judges throughout the federal courts. So I don't know how far it will go. I don't know for instance, right now, though the Supreme Court punted, well, for instance, that was on the Christian wedding cake maker who was able to get away with not baking a wedding cake for a same sex couple, even though he was doing business with the general public. And then also the 303 Creative, the case of a Christian wedding website maker who said that she will not develop websites for the wedding of same sex couples. And the Supreme Court said that was part of her constitutional rights. The big ticket item will be again, can a Christian or any religious person doing business with the general public who claims to have a religion that bars doing business with atheists refuse even services that don't require any ideological participation in furthering atheism? Like, for instance, can the Christian restaurant owner refuse to seat atheists at the lunch counter just because of the restaurant owner's religious belief? If we lose that, then we are second class citizens.
Yeah, I see that the current administration can just target people. They can just declare that any Democrats, all Democrats are terrorists because they've said that. There have been certain people who have said that in the last couple of months. Do you remember?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and they can say that atheists are terrorists. They can say that Muslim, not just specific Muslims, or not just general Muslims, but specifically care, that they can say that they're a terrorist organization. Which again, I don't care. I don't. They don't conform to any definition of terrorism. They're just being declared the terror. And I think this is ironic that Dennis Prager a decade ago was criticizing the left. He said because the left didn't come up with arguments against their opponents, they would just come up with a name. Well, you just call them a fascist, and then and then you don't have to listen to his arguments anymore because you've just labeled him a fascist, and therefore you can just stick an ice pick in his back, right? This is the way that Dennis Prager was arguing, but Trump referred to leftists as fascists, not realizing that fascism is a right-wing position by definition. Therefore, it's not possible to be a leftist fascist. But he doesn't want to admit to being a fascist himself. So, and all he does ever is accuse everyone else of whatever he's doing. So he accuses what he considers the leftists, which in most cases are not even leftists, but everybody who doesn't agree with him is a leftist. Like the old adage that everybody I don't like is Hitler. Well, that's what except that Hitler's the only person he likes. So he says that all the leftists are fascists, and so he comes up with this label rather than having to do. So he and then using terrorism. So everybody that disagrees with him is a terrorist, and he even accuses those who are trying to defend the Constitution of being insurrectionists. Like
Well,
the Democrats who said recently that that military officers can not obey illegal commands, and that caused Trump, who's absolutely authoritarian, wants to use the military against our own country. He was livid at the idea that he can't command the military to go out and kill people like the Supreme Court said that he could. He can tell SEAL Team 6 to go out and kill his political opponents. And what do you mean SEAL Team 6 can just say no?
yeah, yeah. And also look at how he turns on allies for even the most modest disagreement. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene had quite a wake up call these past 10 days from now Trump even wants to have a primary opponent come after her. So the problem is, again, what is he using this power for? Is he using his power to trample rights of others that are secured under the Bill of Rights? And to what extent will this Supreme Court go in allowing him to do so? See, this is something that we really can't we really can't predict. This is why I tell everybody that every presidential election and every race for the US Senate should be seen as nothing more than a referendum on the Supreme Court. That's what they are, a referendum on the Supreme Court.
I
And
used to consider the Supreme Court to be sober minds and deep thinkers and all of that. You wouldn't be on the Supreme Court if you didn't have compassion, consideration, and wisdom.
yeah,
But such is not the case anymore.
no, it's ideological, particularly his lower court appointees. Uh, so, I mean, we would really need the Supreme Court at some point to draw lines that Trump can't cross. If they don't, then there's a whole new arena of problems that I have no way of predicting how we're going to handle. You know, all my pessimism about the court and about church state separation, even my doom and gloom predictions since the 1980 elections, I didn't anticipate nor did I foresee a Supreme Court that will allow a religious right wing enabling president to do whatever he wants. I mean, look,
The immunity ruling floored me too.
yeah,
No
Yeah.
matter how corrupt the court is, how could they have done something that stupid?
yeah. I mean, look at what Trump said I think, a couple of months ago. I'm not a dictator, but as president, I can do whatever I want.
On that, I'm 54, and ever since primary school in history, everybody is so proud of how America, not the first democracy, some kind of cradle democracy. I don't remember how we used to get sold on it, but that used to be a point of pride. And now it's I'm not a dictator, and JD Vance is like maybe America needs to get over its phobia of dictators. Like, I've never seen people in high office question democracy until now. Openly criticize democracy like that.
And then we also have Lauren Boebert saying that the Americans have too many rights.
Well, that's interesting because if you are a limited government conservative, you want as many rights as you can have, uh, as contrasted with your government. You see, again, this is where the libertarian wing of conservatives, like for instance, when you mentioned that people would automatically assume you're a communist because you're an atheist, uh, people don't remember that the most prominent defender of unbridled capitalism in the 20th century was an atheist, Ayn Rand. So you can't arbitrarily lump these things together and think that nobody will pick and choose for themselves if something seems right for them, regardless of where it falls on some ideological spectrum.
I also find that many of my critics, when they tell me that I'm wrong about politics, when I can get them to explain what I'm wrong about, it usually, and that's rare, it's rare that that happens, but when it happens, it's usually something that they assume a position that I never expressed or held. Because again, they're trying to label things and will not consider discussing policy directly.
Yeah, they won't consider discussing policy directly, but for our purposes, the strategy that atheists and religious dissenters need in America today is to be able to reach people who identify as limited government conservatives and finally explain why they should join with us, because the very principle of limited government is violated by the religious right wing agenda. And it's something we needed to do from the beginning because liberal to left, there are not enough people without the aid of others to countermand what's going on right now. The degree to which the religious right has been put in charge by a compliant Supreme Court is so entrenched that we need the broadest based coalition. And even then, you see, I know that a lot of our viewers right now want me to predict the future, and all I can do is offer what are possible scenarios, but I can't exactly predict what's going to happen because no one knows what will happen next year's elections. Uh, no one will know uh, who will win in 2028. So there's reason for us to be frightened and to organize to protect freedom of conscience against the religious right. But with, let's say, the first 10 months, the Trump administration, outside of Supreme Court rulings, I think I'm dealing with a broken crystal ball.
Well, I've noticed that prophecies never come true, but educated predictions can, and
Yeah.
you've demonstrated that a few times. So I'm going to read a few comments because we are over
Okay.
time, and I want to be respectful of your time, sir. So we can let you out of here as soon as I can. We had one comment from Right-Handed Sith says, Mrs. Ra, addressing my wife, says, I would have placed you in your 30s or maybe early 40s. I'm 54 and I wish I looked as young as you. I'm just gelling a bit.
We're
Yeah.
birth year twins. We're both 54.
Yeah, a fun thing about my wife, she does the goth scene, and she can put on a look. Anyway, enough of that bragging. I'm going to read some other comments. Let's see. Right-Handed Sith again says, can't we just reverse the charges and refuse to service to them in return?
I don't know, and I don't know if that would help. because there are not that many atheists that run crucial businesses, or there are not that many people of all stripes who run businesses where they can afford to turn away customers. So, given how many Christians there are compared to us, if we began, let's see, those atheists who own restaurants say we're not going to serve Christians, they'll go down the street. They have more options than we do.
Yeah.
So
Many years ago, I was a tattooist. Yeah, I had my own tattoo shop, and very often I would have people come in and wanting religious tattoos, and I would kind of dissuade them. Are you sure you want to put a tattoo on your body for something that you may, as a lot of people do, later reject, or you may want to reconsider that. There was one guy who wanted me to do Jesus on a cross, but the cross wasn't a cross. The cross was an anchor because he was going into the Navy. And without explaining it to the guy, the notion of strapping Jesus to an anchor, I found just too funny not to do. Okay. Next comment is the Primordial Puggles sent 5 RN Raw gift memberships. Thank you for that. And then Fred Blassie, 3212, offers $10 and says, if Dems get the White House in 2028, we must expand the Supreme Court. Last time it was expanded was 1869 with a population of 33 million people. We now have 10 times the population today. Do you want to comment on that?
yeah, again, I did earlier. That's a mathematical issue, and you see, only gives me some pause, and I don't have an answer. Is when we finally finished expanding, who'll wind up with the majority?
Yeah.
See, so I'm again, this is not an ideological problem, it's an actuarial one, and I can't predict. I mean, if we wind up with a much larger Supreme Court, but the majority are still religious right wingers, then we're in the same situation, maybe even worse.
What
I
are our
like
chances
Pete. I
what
like
are our
being able to hold.
chances?
I'm sorry.
About that.
Go ahead, dear.
What are our chances of impeaching any of them?
None.
Oh goodness.
No, we can't. First of all,
Impeachable things.
well, you can't really impeach. We don't want to set a precedent for impeaching judges because of their opinions, because
Like
that will apply.
Thomas.
That's a difficult one.
Well,
Like Judge
there's term
Thomas.
limits. There's corruption charges. I mean, they
Yeah.
should be held accountable the same way
Yeah, they
any
could
other
be held accountable for things other than their
Yes.
opinions. But right now, remember this: to the House impeaches,
Hmm.
the Senate has the power to convict or acquit. In order to convict a public official and remove them from office, it takes 2/3 of the Senate.
Mm.
Judge
So the
Thomas,
next,
though, like outside of his decisions, like his wife, has like there's ethical corruption issues with him and his wife. So like
Well, see, again, the question of his wife, the question of Justice Alito's flying some Christian flag upside down. Right now, I don't think they're profitable avenues for us to look at
Mhm.
because, first of all, we would get no traction in Congress. And we have to focus only on those areas where we might be able to stanch some of the hemorrhaging.
and then I think this is the last comment. Galactic Marxist. There's multiple questions here. Offers $10 and says, do you think the future of America is going to be more like the troubles of Northern Ireland? Something worse, something better? What do you think of the idea of a national divorce?
I don't know Northern Ireland or something worse. I don't know how bad it will get. In terms of a national divorce, I've actually been thinking about that for a number of years. I don't think pragmatically it will happen, but I think there will be such divisions in the country over the religious issues that we may have to somehow be separated, even if we're living under the same roof. For instance, I was laughing a few years ago. Texas Republican Party said not only that church state separation is a myth, but that Texas should leave the United States and become its own independent nation. I mean, quite frankly, there are many of us who wouldn't mind if that happened given the current state of things right now. I mean, uh,
If
you know,
Texas left, wouldn't we? I mean, we're one of the southern states, so and we're one of the red states, so we are actually one of the ones that are most dependent on Obamacare, right?
yeah, right. So I know, but uh, see, again, I'm being asked to speculate about the future. All I can say is it'll get worse before it might get better. But we have to organize and we have to make new allies that we never had before among those who don't want overarching government. And it doesn't matter what else people disagree with us on. You know, um, a bit of an exaggeration, but I used to say that if we're having a separation of church and state meeting and somebody is fully with us, but they say they just came from the beach where they shot whales with an AK-47, we sort of, not bat an eyelash. Uh, More or less, we're going to have to work with every fair minded person who doesn't want overarching government, regardless of whether we agree on other issues or not. Because right now, people who want to preserve modern secular government, there are not enough of us active to make a difference. Right
The
now,
mm,
oh,
sorry.
okay, I'm gonna be a little more specific. The religious right wing, as channeled currently through what can be called Christian nationalism, they are winning at this point.
They aren't talking about an actual secession because that's not constitutional, and that we fought a civil
Yeah,
war over that.
yeah, I
But
don't, I really, I mean, I don't want to get into that because there's nothing that I can say about a possible redesigning of the country with religious states breaking away and the non-religious, and we're becoming two separate countries. There's nothing I can say about that that would give us practical value for the fight we have to engage in today.
like it's only in the joking form that Western states like California, Oregon, and Washington say they could form Cascadia or something. But
And become part of Canada.
no,
Uh,
no, on their own. But wait, no,
Okay.
I have another point. Um, they're talking about soft secession type things though, like
uh,
like for
I see
example, we
again,
want.
right now, right now, I don't think we can give attention to that because it's not realistic. We
Mhm.
have to fight the immediate battles. I don't see, I mean, these things wouldn't start to happen for decades, if at all. So I just can't speculate on them
They're
because they're
already
not going to
starting.
immediately happen. We're
They're
not going to.
already they're already starting to cooperate with each other. Because Obamacare might go away. The three states forming their own health exchange together. So there are some things where maybe blue and red states will start to become really, really different from
We
each
already
other.
are. We
Yeah, but
already are.
more
I mean,
so.
yeah, we are already very different. I mean, this is, uh, we're already very different. Uh, I mean, if you look at uh, my two senators, Padilla and Schiff, and then you look at Conran and Cruz, I mean, there's a substantial difference. Maybe on some things we can form ad hoc alliances, but I don't see. I
Mm-hmm.
don't see right now any value in oh, in speculating about an actual breaking away. That's
Yeah.
too far off into the future. We have immediate battles to fight.
Mm-hmm.
When it might become relevant is if the divisions between religious states and non-religious states, in terms of to what extent government can push religion, if that division keeps getting deeper and deeper, maybe in 5 to 10 years we revisit it, but not right now.
I got
Yeah.
two more
It might
comments
be like
here.
sanctuary states for people getting away from persecution in states that become too religious, like trans people, or like the one of the first people to the canary in the coal mine there. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so the sanctuary states for people that are just subjected to really bad religious laws in other states.
The
Well, I guess
mighty chicken.
this is going to depend on how much the Supreme Court allows the states to do. Right now, immediately, the solution is for people in those states who could face actual persecution to leave and move to other states.
Yeah.
There is no bar constitutionally against interstate travel or changing your residence from one to the other. But in terms of breakaway, in terms of severing the country and certain states going off on their own, that's way too speculative
Mhm.
at this point.
Mhm.
I got two more comments here from Mighty Chicken 7774 says if we let others leave for ideologies, those who died in the first Civil War would have done so in vain. Keeping the Union together was one of the biggest reasons for the war. And a follow-up comment it says a national divorce would be the end of our nation and would eventually end up in a future war.
Maybe so. You see, I can't speculate. I don't know what it would mean. I mean, this is right now, I want us all to fight the immediate present day battle against the religious right and its enabling Trump administration. But as far as how dystopian the future of America will be and whether there will be attempted breakaways surrounding the cultural differences, I have no way of knowing. I don't want to speculate right now because I don't think we have one moment to spare from the immediate fight.
Gotcha. Honey, do you have any closing comments?
No, other than to let Eddie talk about close this out with what immediately could we focus on? Where should our priorities be?
Right now, in 2026, should be, I know this is difficult, and I don't know what the dent will be that we can make, but next year, defeating as many religious right wing senators as possible and replacing them with pro church state separation and pro choice senators who, for the next 2 years, would not confirm Trump's judicial nominees. That's the only thing I can think of. Who's up next year in Texas? Is it Cruz or Conran? Somebody
It's
is up.
Cornyn.
Oh,
It's
he's up
Cornyn.
next. Okay.
Yeah,
Is what Paxton? Is he running against him or
he's
something?
running against Paxton, and the Democrats are hoping that works out good for them. And Paxton beats Cornyn because he's more defeatable than Cornyn. They think.
Okay, I don't know, but I'm in every state. That's all we can do. And other than that, this is another. This take a long time. The religious right began assuming local control by running for school boards and town councils in the early 80s. Once they got the school boards, particularly like in Vista, California, that we were able to defeat them in the courts finally, but they stopped evolution from being taught in the public schools. We atheists and religious dissenters and minorities need to learn how to play the game of local politics. and to begin to assume positions in local governing bodies, particularly those that pertain to education. It's not a flashy thing to do, but it's sort of the gritty groundwork that the religious right did for its first few years and gained enormous power all over the country. I mean, you see all the school boards in the early to mid 80s, they're doing it again, but banning this book, banning that book, um, banning a book even because it was too pessimistic about the human future. Uh, they're really, particularly in small town America and medium sized towns in America, it would be wonderful if church state separation minded people, regardless of their personal views, got onto school boards, library boards, town councils, and of course, state legislatures. I mean, that would be a major step. We're not going to bring down Christian naturalism from the top down. We're going to have to start at the bottom, lay a foundation, and move upwards.
Yeah.
And it's local politics, local education, local government, where I think we have the best chance of beginning. And we do so by talking about protecting the rights of conscience and beliefs of everyone. And when it comes to education, we have another tool in our box to talk about a superseding consideration which transcends all ideology, but which is essential for modern life, and that's preserving the integrity of science.
I'm afraid that we've kept you for almost 2 hours.
That's okay.
I want to thank you again. It's always a good time interviewing you. If there are no other closing comments, I'd just like to say that I had to tell my mother today after an argument about how the Democrats are doing whatever the Republicans are doing in her mind and all of that. I told her that if she said that I'm sorry that we disagree. I'm like, "Oh, well, I've got to go back and continue fighting against the evil that you voted for."
Well, I mean, it's very interesting. My dad was an ordained Orthodox rabbi from Lithuania. On my 16th birthday, he ran up to me, gave me a hug and a kiss. He said, "My son, promise me you'll always be a good Jew, even though nothing about any religion is true."
Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. And
Okay.
Alondra, thank you for being on. Thank you for helping out with this today.
My hope for the future is something like what we saw in the New York mayor race with Mamdani. They spent so much money on that race and they still lost it. And younger people, millennials, Gen Z, unfortunately, my generation is now the one that's most voting for this MAGA stuff, and like silent generation is dying off, and boomers, and not that I want a bunch of people to die, but they're the future, and I hope that they can fix what we messed up.
Well, we have to have they're going to have to be specialists. They're going to have to be sort of like a shock troops of those of us who hone our skills in fighting the religious right. And that has to become a subspecialty of preserving the modern secular world. And again, we don't know how this is going to turn out. Actually, as I look forward or backward to my 75th birthday next month, it's okay if I'm not going to live to see the result of my efforts. I know I won't. This is going to be take many decades, maybe even be multi-generational. But when you think about ending religious tyranny, it's a fight so much worth fighting that even if we ultimately don't win, the fight is worth waging.
And the last comment is from J.R. Pence, who offers $2 and says, "We need to hold their feet to the laws that we have."
I hope we can.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.